Hello, everyone. Thank you for attending. Just giving a couple of seconds for people to trickle in as we're starting this session. Okay, I will just go ahead and begin. So first of all, thank you guys for all attending our session on nature-based solutions as an adaptation to extreme weather. This is the fourth session, a part of the virtual National Adaptation Forum. And my name is Daniela Roll. I am the Program Associate for the National Adaptation Forum. And we will start this session. And at first, I just want to go over some very brief housekeeping rules as we move into our session. First of all, please rename yourself with your name and affiliation and introduce yourself in the chat. We will be monitoring this, and this is a great opportunity to get to know other people within the field. And please keep yourself muted during the presentations just to be respectful to our different speakers. And if you have any questions during the presentations, please drop them in the Zoom chat as we will be monitoring them. And there will be a chance to ask the presenters after their presentations. And finally, even though this is a virtual session, it is much more fun if people are engaging and interacting within the chat to keep this a fun session. And I am now going to pass it over to Doug, who will helping me moderate this session today. No.
Good afternoon, all. I'm Doug Mason. I work in the White House Office of Science and Technology Policy, where I work to help scale up nature-based solutions. First, I wanted to offer a couple updates of other things that are going on, just that you might be interested. The first is that NOAA has a Climate and Societal Interactions division is running a nature-based solution webinar series as well. There's a couple sessions coming up if you're interested. All of the information is online, so you can Google it, but there's ones on scaling nature-based solutions coming up in January, and one on using nature-based solutions for multiple benefits, including health, that's coming up in about a week. So feel free to join those if you're interested. You can pass the next slide, Daniela. The second is that just last night, we released a report, which is the product of a collaboration of people from about 30 organizations, including some on this call, in terms of the evidence base for nature-based solutions, in terms of hazard risk reduction and ecosystem services. This is so new that I haven't even had a chance to reach out to co-authors, some of which are joining me today. But it's an attempt to try to synthesize both academic perspectives in terms of what the literature tells us, as well as practitioner perspectives, to have a more synthetic view of what we know today in terms of the evidence for nature-based solutions and scaling them up, as well as priorities in terms of both research and additional work to understand them better. We're going to have an upcoming session related to this as part of this webinar series, but for now, feel free to scan that QR code and take a look at the findings. Daniela, I believe the next is just to introduce our speakers. Am I correct?
Yes.
Great. So we have a fantastic lineup today of federal thought leaders that can speak to what their agencies are doing, and then resources, whether they're technical or financial, that may be available. So we have, I think, starting us off is going to be Merissa Zuzulock. She represents the Federal Emergency Management Agency, where she is the branch chief of the Future Conditions Resilience Branch. We'll be followed up with colleagues at the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. That's Kyle McKay, who works in their engineering laboratory, and Margaret Kurth, who is a research environmental engineer, also in the environmental lab. Next, we'll have the Environmental Protection Agency, where Robin DeYoung of the Office of Water will speak to us. She's also the lead of the Green Infrastructure Federal Collaborative, and Stephanie Santello, who is a senior policy advisor, to talk about work at EPA. And last, we'll have the Department of Interior, where Whitney Boone, who is works in the Office of Policy Analysis, will talk about work they are doing, including an internal roadmap that has many resources you might find interesting. And I believe each is going to give a short intro so you get a sense of what they have. And then Daniela can tell more about this when we get there, but there'll be breakout sessions where you'll be able to join smaller group conversations with any or as many of those individuals as you're interested to dive deeper and ask more questions that may be relevant to you. Daniela, over to you.
Yes, so I'll just briefly go over the structure of this session so that people are aware. So we will be heading into our presentations portion of our session today, as Doug had mentioned. And if you have any questions regarding the presentations, just a reminder, please drop them in the chat as we can ask the speakers after their presentations. And then we will transition into the breakout activities as Doug has mentioned, and we will give more instructions on what that will look like later on. And I see Merissa is already starting. Awesome. I will hand it over to you.
Sorry, I lost my mouse for a second. Everything's fine. Everything's fine. Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Merissa Zuzulock. I'm the FEMA Future Conditions Resilience Branch Chief. Thanks so much for having us here today to discuss the essential role that nature-based solutions in FEMA's approach for disaster mitigation and recovery. This presentation, I'm going to share FEMA's ongoing efforts to implement nature-based solutions as a core component of community resilience, reducing disaster risks and enhancing recovery efforts while supporting environmental sustainability. I'm also going to explore some examples of nature-based solutions in action, including diverse applications like wetlands restoration, living shorelines, and some other collaborative projects. Each of these demonstrates how nature-based solutions can strengthen communities before and after disasters. So before we get into the role of nature-based solution in disaster mitigation and recovery, I wanted to provide a brief overview of the disaster cycle to better contextualize nature-based solutions. So I'm going to start with preparedness, which is actions taken before a disaster to plan and prepare for potential hazards like emergency planning, training, and community drills. And then response is that immediate action during and after a disaster to protect lives and property, like search and rescue, emergency relief, and evacuation. And then recovery, which are efforts to restore and rebuild affected communities after a disaster. And that's rebuilding infrastructure, restoring those services, and then supporting the economic recovery. And then you have mitigation. Mitigation is that long-term action that's taken to reduce or eliminate risks from future disasters, like building flood defenses, enforcing safer building codes, and restoring those natural barriers. So the difference between mitigation and recovery. So mitigation focuses on preventing or reducing the impact of future disasters by addressing hazards and vulnerabilities ahead of time, where recovery involves repairing and rebuilding after a disaster has occurred to help communities return to normal and build back stronger. So FEMA's committed to leveraging grant programs to target investments that will enable state, local, tribal, and our territorial governments to directly address their own threats from climate change and other natural hazards. So FEMA's hazard mitigation grant programs provide fundings for actions that address risks to reduce disasters like wildfires, drought, extreme heat, hurricanes, earthquakes, and flooding. So we encourage communities to think about FEMA's mitigation programs as a collective portfolio for natural hazard mitigation. Our mitigation programs can all support and fund nature-based solution projects, which is an important component to it. Our disaster cycle programs, that's when a disaster declaration triggers funding for hazard mitigation projects. So our PA mitigation, our public assistance mitigation, falls up under that, where it supports communities recovering from major disasters by providing mitigation funding opportunities to restore and strengthen public infrastructure. We also have our hazard mitigation grant program, which implements long-term hazard mitigation measures after a major disaster declaration. And then our hazard mitigation grant program post-fire, which helps communities implement hazard mitigation measures after a wildfire disaster. And then we have our annual grant programs, which is funding and requirements. So those funding requirements vary annually. and information is shared in a public notice of funding opportunity. It's also called a NOFO. I think a lot of people are familiar with that. So our flood mitigation assistance program falls up underneath that, reduces or eliminates the risk of repetitive flooding damage to a building and structures that's insured under the National Flood Insurance Program. And then we also have our Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities grant program, which I think is one of our very popular ones. It supports the undertaking of new and innovative projects that reduce risks faced from like disasters and natural hazards. It also includes direct technical assistance. It also has non-financial support directly to community for whatever help that they need. And then this is a fairly new one here, the Safeguarding Tomorrow Revolving Loan Fund. This program is the first HMA program to be provided to provide capitalization grants to eligible states, territorial and tribal governments for revolving loan funds. The awarded grant fund will be used by an applicant to administer its revolving loan fund and provide direct loans to local governments based on its unique mitigation needs and its priorities. Here, eligible sub-applicants, the timing requirements and the eligibility, they vary by program. But the state hazard mitigation officer is the main point of contact for FEMA mitigation support. And that's typically in the state emergency management agency or equivalent. So FEMA hazard mitigation funding is not new, but with increasing disasters and the more emphasis on climate and hazard risk reduction, interest in FEMA's funding has grown, and our programs have expanded and diversified to meet those needs. We received congressional support and under the administration to continue expanding expanding and building upon our programs, notably with the creation of our newest grant program that I spoke of, which was BRIC in 2020, and our new state revolving loan fund in 2021, and that is through the IIJA. So increasingly over the last several years, billions of dollars in hazard mitigation grants have been obligated to communities across the country. In the last fiscal year, more than $2.9 billion in hazard mitigation grants were delivered to states, tribes, territories, which resulted in mitigation actions that will reduce risk. Although FEMA funds hazard mitigation work across the country for all types of hazard and risks and projects, interest and support for nature-based projects to reduce in communities is expanding over our programs. And so while nature-based solutions has not historically been tracked across our grant programs, over the last few years, we have some data available for the percentage of nature-based projects submitted for our annual FMA and selected competitive BRIC, our BRIC programs. So here's an example of one of our BRIC projects. It's a BRIC 2023 Oakland Alameda Flood Adaptation and Community Benefits project. It's aimed to reduce flood risk and enhance climate resilience in Oakland's airport in their Cedar Zone, Alameda's Bay Farm Island, and East Coast San Leonardo Creek watershed is prioritizing the Justice 40 underserved communities. It incorporates ecological armoring, some transportation, border protection, marsh and shoreline restoration, as well as some stormwater system upgrades and neighborhood greening. Here's an FMA project. This is in the city of Three Forks. It's a rural community of nearly 2,000 people in southwestern Montana, a region that's experienced a lot of growth because the growth and development due to its close proximity to the city of Bozeman, as well as Yellowstone Park. Three Forks is just south of the confluence of Madison, Jefferson, and the Gallatin rivers, where together they form the headwaters of the Missouri River. So this project is intended to decrease flood risk for 73% of the city's population. It removes the entire western portion of the city from both the 100-year and the 500-year. Here's another one, HMGP. I actually just returned from Puerto Rico. Last week I was had an opportunity to attend a watershed symposium. But as a result of multiple years and many partners, FEMA funded the first coral reef restoration grant last year. It's an HMGP project, which I mentioned earlier, and this is a new and innovative hazard mitigation. The project aligns with Puerto Rico's hazard mitigation plan, which identifies nature-based solutions as a priority. And this project aligns with the goals to reduce the loss of life and property from natural hazards. Excuse me, yeah. Did I miss one? Oh, Egg Harbor. Yes, sorry. So this is our PA mitigation. This is in Egg Harbor Township, New Jersey. I'm not far from here. I did live here during Hurricane Sandy. So a lot of these projects are near and dear to my heart. Storm surge and coastal wave action overwashed like 3,000 linear feet of protective dunes that were partially protected by a gabion rock mattress and sand fencing in Egg Harbor Township during Hurricane Sandy. PA funding restored PA funding can restore back to pre-disaster conditions, but mitigation added that the additional gabions to the damaged section. So with 406 funding, plus you add in the 404 funding and the previous gabion mattresses, this ended up turning into like a hybrid solution because of the underlying gabion rock mattresses. So it's like more traditional gray. And then to rebuild and replant dunes is nature-based solutions. You're going to hear from my friend and colleague, Robin DeYoung, but we had the opportunity to work with her on the Green Infrastructure Federal Collaborative Committee. Last year, we identified federal resources for our nature-based solutions and established and aligned resources to a nature-based solution life cycle, which you can see here on the slide. This effort helped identify a critical gap in our resources for phase 5, which was construction and implementation, phase 6, operations and maintenance, and then 7 is monitoring and applied sciences. A truncated version of this nature-based solution cycle and a list of over 1,200 resources were featured in the White House publication Nature-Based Solutions Resource Guidebook 2.0, which was released in December. And then in parallel, we're working on reviewing and validating over 1,000 projects to create a comprehensive database. It will feature FEMA-funded nature-based projects and inform a GIS map to follow to support a future nature-based solutions dashboard so we can offer agency-wide insights into nature-based solution efforts. So with that is the end of my presentation. And if anybody has any questions or comments, please feel free to reach out to the email address here. That goes directly to my team, and they'll make sure it gets to the right person. If that's me, then it'll come directly to me. But it's been a pleasure to be here with you all today.
Hey, thank you, Merissa. I know there was a lot of information to digest for people, but if anyone has any pressing questions, please put them in the chat. Otherwise, you can spend some time with Merissa during our breakout activity later in the session and ask questions with her. Don't see any questions coming in, so I guess we can start teeing up the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Kyle, if you want to prepare your slide deck. Okay. I will hand it over to you to learn more about what the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers is doing with nature-based solutions.
Great, thank you. I also want to start by thanking Mr. Mason at OSTP and the EcoAdapt team for inviting us and organizing today. Thank you all for putting together such a great series. As she said, my name is Kyle McKay, and I'm a researcher with the Army Corps of Engineers. I work out of New York City. I'm joined today by Margaret Kurth, who is also a researcher working out of our Boston area. And our goal today is to provide a general overview of how the Corps' mission intersects with nature-based solutions. The Department of Defense writ large is a huge place with a lot of relevant programs and activities working on nature-based solutions, and our goal is not to comprehensively summarize that. We're going to focus mostly on the big picture and technical resources that we think might be of interest to this community. So for those that aren't familiar, the Corps of Engineers is a very old agency. So it traces its roots to 1775, making it older than the United States for anybody that can count. And that puts us in a really interesting place. So we were founded to support George Washington's army and still do a lot of support for the military in that regard. So our agency has two main programs. We have the military support programs, which we're not going to talk as much about today, and the civil works programs, which focus mostly on water management. Our agency is rather large, more than 35,000 employees, and it's mostly civilian, but has a few military folks in leadership roles. So we have civilian offices led by Army commanders. And what are we doing in those offices? Well, our main missions have evolved over time and grown. They started in the water arena with navigation and harbor maintenance and channel dredging, things like that. After the 1927 flood on the Mississippi, they expanded into flood risk management, and then in the 80s into ecosystem restoration. And I would suggest that in the last decade or so, there's been more of an emphasis on integration. And that's where integration of those missions, and that's really where nature-based solutions have risen prominently within our agency. So how does the Corps operate? In somewhat of contrast to the programs Merissa was describing, the Corps isn't primarily a granting agency, so we don't have a lot of granting programs. Instead, we have kind of three main lines of different kinds of programs. One are related to federal assets, so things that the taxpayers own and we help operate. So you can imagine a large lock and dam structure. Like this is Cape Fear River Lock and Dam #1, which in this photo is being retrofitted with a fish passage structure. Or you could imagine a large federal navigation channel like that on the Mississippi River, shown in the lower left, or a federal reservoir with recreational missions as well as natural resource management missions. But that's kind of one set of programs. A different set of programs focus on newer projects through partnerships and collaboration. And here you can imagine the Corps working with a local cost share sponsor, like a city or state or nonprofit, on executing different projects related to these mission areas. So at the top, I've shown an example of Utoy Creek. This is a small-scale stream restoration project with the city of Atlanta, funded through our Continuing Authorities Fund. Or you could imagine a large system of projects like those shown here in Jamaica Bay, which involve lots of different cost share sponsors, lots of different missions, as well as congressional authorization through Water Resource Development Acts. And then finally, the other kind of line of programming you can imagine within the Corps is related to technical support. So we serve as an agency of technical experts that work with and for other agencies and other partner institutions. We have a set of programs called Planning Assistance to the States, where Corps of Engineers expertise can be brought to bear on local issues. But we also provide research through the laboratory system Margaret and I work for, as well as design guidance. So often federal design guidance on engineering issues comes from the Corps or other institutions like us that then gets adopted by local partners. And how do nature-based solutions fit into this picture? Well, within the Corps for the last 10 years or so, we've talked a lot about engineering with nature. And this is an initiative that grew out of the research part of the Corps and has sort of taken wildfire across the agency. And with this program, with Engineering with Nature, we talk about a few big ideas, some of which are shown here. So you can think about engineering with nature as being about seizing on multiple benefits of integrated projects, thinking about that triple bottom line of economic, social, and environmental outcomes. Or we can think about engineering with nature as being about efficiencies, so working towards better projects requiring fewer resources. or about aligning with natural processes. I'm always struck by how important prepositions are, right? It's not engineering for nature, it's engineering with nature, and about aligning our engineering actions to work with rather than against or explicitly for nature. In this paradigm, we also talk a lot about collaborative processes. I think about Tom Sawyer in Mark Twain's classic. He's out there painting the fence and doesn't want to paint it by himself, so he talks all of his friends into painting with him. And that idea of all working together towards these bigger outcomes, I think, is central to how the Corps approaches engineering with nature. In terms of technical resources, the Corps is working hard on a lot of different technical resources that may be brought to bear on nature-based solutions. So in the research space, we work on a variety of projects from basic science all the way through application of that science on projects. And we work across the project spectrum of early planning all the way through operations and eventually long-term maintenance. In the research community, we've been working hard to develop different forms of design and analysis tools that may be of interest. And again, those apply to different parts of the life cycle. So with early project planning, there are documents and reports such as the International Guidelines for Natural and Nature-Based Features that may be of use. Or we're working now on engineering design guidance for 4 different types of nature-based solutions. Oyster reefs, floodplain connectivity, large wood for riverbank protection, and restoration of tidal hydrology. So we're trying to move the engineering and design practice forward within our agency, but those practices may apply to yours as well. In the analytical arena, our agency produces lots of different tools. Some of the classic ones for hazard analysis you might be familiar with are things like the Hydrologic Engineering Center's River Analysis Tool, HEC-RAS, which is kind of a standard note flood modeling. Or we could think about other types of tools as well. So here I've shown a web application we put together recently to help estimate the cost of dam removal for groups that are interested in exploring that topic. And then finally, within the Corps and within the Engineering with Nature initiative, we think a lot about communication and not just doing good work, but sharing it widely. And that comes in lots of different formats. Sometimes it's standard methods of communicating science like journal papers or models. Other times it's novel outreach mechanisms. Like there's an Engineering with Nature podcast that I think it's on its 6th season now, or these documents shown here are called the Engineering with Nature Atlas series, and they compile different examples of nature-based solutions from around the world. And I think there's something like 100 or 150 documented examples that are put together in a kind of coffee table style book to share with others. But as I mentioned, partnership and collaboration are central to the Corps' approach on nature-based solutions. In 2020, the Corps and the University of Georgia started a collaborative network called the Network for Engineering with Nature. And there's a web address at the bottom here for those interested. And this network was started as sort of a sandbox for all of us to collaborate together to mainstream nature-based solutions. And the network is working towards 6 main issues as a group. And now this group has grown to include 30 institutions, some of which are in the nonprofit, public, academic, and private sectors. And those 6 main topics we're working on together are shown here. So first, we seek to gather folks together and convene and facilitate knowledge sharing. We're also trying to advance the community and move science and engineering forward relative to nature-based solutions. Third, we're working to scale up and shorten that road to implementation of these features. Fourth, we're informing real-world projects and working with our practitioners within the course district offices. Fifth, we're developing educational materials to inform both current and future practitioners. So thinking a lot about continuing education versus university environments. And then finally, some of our partners are working in the advocacy space to put together the sound policy that leads to good projects. With that, I will cede the floor, except to note that if you'll join us in our breakout, we're going to talk mostly about technical resources, models, mechanisms to collaborate, and we look forward to your feedback. Happy to take any questions now, if there's time.
Yes, I see one question for you, Kyle. Rosalie put in the chat. When will the USACE for guidance documents be ready?
That's a great question. We're working as quickly as we can. We're hoping to have something shareable in the next, I would say, 12 months, having some of those published. If some of the pesky co-authors like me were locked in a room writing, that timeline might get accelerated. So let me know if you're interested, and I'm happy to share status reports as we whittle away at them.
Thank you. And does anyone else have any other questions? And I see Robert put in the chat. You mentioned oyster reefs, restoration of tidal hydrology, floodplain connection, and another NBS with guidance. What was the final type you mentioned?
The final type there, let's see, is working with large wood in the context of stream bank protection. So how large wood gets used, for instance, in tow protection of bank stabilization projects.
So Kyle, this is Scott Satterthwaite, Kansas Department of Health and Environment, Watershed Management Section. I've been working with the Silverjack project. We came up with the Kansas Healthy Watersheds. And the reason why I bring that up is because we actually used the sandbox method to take the hydrologic group and the SES runoff curve out of the HMS model. And we incorporated actual organic matter and infiltration rate from soil from farm fields. And there's a green amp method that has a correlation with porosity and KSAT, and put that into the model. And part of the reason for this, and I put this in the chat to Danielle, I didn't want to distract everybody, but part of the reason for that is because when I started looking at nature-based solutions several years ago, it doesn't fit Kansas. Kansas, the most land use is agriculture. Our towns are small. Our communities are not very well equipped to do things like constructing wetlands and maintaining them, and buffers and maintaining them. I work with the EPA 319 program. We did that 15 years ago, and we found that they just weren't able to do those kind of things. So we're trying to use the watershed approach. So we're looking at trying to improve the watershed-wide soil health. And, the information I put into Daniela, she can share that now if she wants. But the main thing is we have a fact sheet out there. We've even put together a slideshow that Brian Rast and I and Kenny Thomas, our regional soil health specialist, put together. And the reason why I bring that up to you is, have you seen any other type of modifications of HMS models that would look at on a watershed scale, remembering that communities are the ones that get the funding from FEMA BRIC. The producer, the watershed landowner, doesn't, but we're looking still at any way we can identify opportunities to talk to communities and maybe show them some of the other modeling techniques.
Yeah, thanks for the question, Scott. I think this has definitely been a place where model development has been emphasized lately. Is how do we start to include nature-based solutions in those modeling domains, be it HMS or maybe other tools like there's the gridded surface subsurface hydrologic analysis tool, Geisha, that's being used by some communities in the Austin area and others working towards these kinds of issues. But it's a great point of keeping the models up to date with the watershed scale implementation of them. I'd be happy to follow up after the session about that. Thanks.
Thank you. And I just wanted to bring up a question that was actually from Merissa, and it was about when I don't know if Merissa, you've seen this comment already. You want to answer it, but it's when do you have
I
any
think I
updates
asked
on BRIC funding?
Yeah, I'd asked a question. Is it for the announcements for FY 2024?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, they are a little bit late because of the hurricane. So we had to delay the announcements. But I think they're intending. Well, actually, they've not given us a date for whenever they're going to bring it back online. But I can give you my email if you want to reach out to me. I can let you know as soon as it's announced.
I will. Thank you so much.
Sure. I'll put my email address in the response.
Thank you. And I think we have one more question for Kyle from Kathleen. It says, how do you estimate long-term maintenance requirements for NBS, and how do they compare to conventional gray infrastructure maintenance costs?
If only I knew the answer. No, that's a fantastic question, Kathleen, and it comes up a whole lot. Two thoughts come to mind. One, Margaret, who's on the line here today, is leading a project looking at that topic for the military right now and estimating different sources of life cycle cost associated with nature-based solutions. So that is an active area of research that I think a lot of folks are very interested in. And the other thread I'll throw out there is that the methods for estimating life cycle costs are some of the tools you learned, in undergrad engineering classes in terms of engineering economics tools about annualization of outcomes. And recently we put together a little web app and widget, which I just dropped in the chat. There's an associated R package to that as well, which helps do the actual math of comparing O&M versus capital costs. But I will be 100% clear, it does not include cost estimates for different types of nature-based solutions. The user has to put those in. So in some ways, we're working to answer your question, but we're not there yet in terms of a comprehensive database.
Very good, thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And we'll start the next presentation. Stephanie, if you want to tee up your slides.
Yeah, perfect. Okay. So hello, everybody. Thank you to Daniela and the EcoAdapt team for pulling this wonderful meeting together and having us hear from EPA today. So I'm Stephanie Santel. I sit in the Office of Policy, Office of the Administrator at EPA, and I wear many hats as a senior advisor, but I'm the chair of our Resilient Infrastructure subgroup on climate, which we're going to talk a little bit about today. And I promise, even though the title of this presentation is about this toolbox that we will discuss for the presentation up front, we will absolutely be talking about nature-based solutions and continue that discussion into the breakout. So just wanted to kick us off by saying that, nature-based solutions can help build local resilience and achieve multiple program goals and priorities for communities, right? And across different sectors and different levels of government. And so they really are a fundamental type of intervention that you can think about as part of your project or kind of a wholesale product across all different types of environmental media, and certainly the national programs that we have at EPA. So in the airspace, the water space, the land management space, even thinking about human health under the guise of chemical safety and pollution prevention. There's definitely ways in which that at EPA we think about incentivizing and encouraging others to think about nature-based solutions, natural infrastructure as an environmental solution, but as solutions that can provide a lot of different benefits for public safety, human health, hazard mitigation, resource efficiency, and many other benefits. So just wanted to start up front with that. For those of you that are not familiar with the way that EPA is structured, we have 5 national program offices here in DC. We also have 10 regional offices across the country that really get down on the ground with community in supporting their environmental efforts. So we can talk pretty much all day about how nature-based solutions are supported through EPA's programs. There's a couple different ways that you see within the circle here that I think a lot of our programs work to support nature-based solution and the adoption of nature-based solutions. So that's absolutely through funding, provision of technical assistance. So thinking about what are those data, those tools, those decision support resources that our partners outside of the agency need to really adopt nature-based solutions, think about funding nature-based solutions, and even that long-term operations and maintenance that Scott mentioned a little bit earlier with his question. And then absolutely the coordination piece of things, thinking about project governance, thinking about bringing in the right investors or the right players for a specific project. And so our programs absolutely work, as I mentioned, across sectors, across partners within those sectors, and thinking about the proper kind of scale of what that project looks like. And then, of course, scope within the context of what that community or what those partners are trying to achieve through their environmental goals, economic goals, social goals, and otherwise. So some of the programs that I'm just lifting up here, absolutely in the funding spaces for clean water and drinking water state revolving funds, and also our brownfields program grants and community change grants. You're going to see a lot of programs here that are either bipartisan infrastructure law or Inflation Reduction Act funded, but also just regular appropriation. So a lot of project eligibilities and support that's out there. A couple of initiatives that are not on the slide, I just want to highlight verbally for everybody as the water technical assistance program that we have stood up at EPA as kind of a front door for technical assistance providers. If you need support with the funding space or the TA space, you can absolutely come in through there. And then you can also look at the environmental finance centers, which are part of that. One initiative that we will absolutely be talking about today is the Green Infrastructure Federal Collaborative, which Robin DeYoung, my colleague, who will be on here a little bit later, heads up. And that's really bringing together not only our federal partners, but thinking about the resources that we want to provide to those outside of the federal space to really effectuate these kind of solutions. I'm going to breeze through these slides as quickly as possible. So for my role at EPA, what I really want to do for folks on this call is put nature-based solutions in the context of climate resilient investments in that funding, thinking about those investments that we're incentivizing and making on the ground. And so EPA is committed to encouraging climate resilient investments. That's not only happening through the way that we operate through our programs, but of course, in partnership with those outside of the agency, states, tribes, NGOs and other community-based organizations that we work with or that we're working for. And a big piece of that was, of course, thinking about the additional funding that we've received through bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Act, and some of the immediate needs that were coming up around those funding opportunities with navigating federal funds, with being able to get some guidance on what effective communication and meaningful engagement could look like around those types of projects. So one of the things that I've been working with our internal group, the Resilient Infrastructure Subgroup on Climate, or risk as we call ourselves, is how do we develop new resources to support climate resilient investments inside and outside of the agency. So one of the things that I absolutely wanted to bring up with you all today was a tool that we released back in September called the Climate Resilience and Adaptation Funding Toolbox. So CRAFT, as we call it, was a direct response to a lot of the needs that we heard with the implementation of bill and IRA funding, and those that were going for those sources of federal funding, including for projects that fell in the nature-based solutions and natural infrastructure space. So it is a new website that can help federal funding applicants and recipients think about adaptation, resilience, and climate justice as part of their project during all stages of development. So when they're sitting down to formulate that initial idea about the project, maybe it is a nature-based solutions project, while they're crafting that application for funding and then thinking about what does long-term implementation look like for me, and how do I make sure I'm making a sound investment that is really thinking about the risks to that project long-term. We wanted to build this for technical assistance providers, knowing that they have the reach and network to get to people on the ground that are actually getting our federal funding and moving these projects, so that they could learn pretty effectively and quickly about what the funding opportunities were that are available, everything to how do I meaningfully engage with that community from the very first time I sit down to talk about that project until that project is running long-term and we're making decisions maybe on how to pivot in the future. So there are some pretty key resources that we provide through CRAFT that I will talk through a little bit on the website. So that's program overviews, really boiling down what our funding programs can do in terms of adaptation and resilience interventions. So getting very specific about those eligible entities and eligible projects, climate risk tools. So thinking about climate risks to project and project location, communications materials, which we've seen very recently with the effects of Helene and Milton, getting folks to think about these concepts far in advance of getting that project funded, so that we can build sustainability into the strategies that we're actually putting funding behind. And then meaningful engagement. How do you think about the right project partners? And also, how are you performing effective engagement with that community and those community members that are maybe highest vulnerability or most at risk to the impacts, or that are the primary or should be the primary kind of beneficiaries of that project? And then last but not least, lots of resources like our definitions page to try to get everybody speaking the same language about when we say resilient infrastructure or we say nature-based solutions, what are we talking about at the federal level, and making sure that the folks that are actually applying for our sources of funding and working with our programs understand what we mean so that they can craft the most successful application as possible. So there's a couple different ways that you can use CRAFT. This is certainly not comprehensive. There's kind of something in it for everybody, even though it is really built for our technical assistance partners that are out there in community, but certainly thinking about, again, finding that available funding, assessing climate risks to project location and projects, and then communicating and engaging. And so I will do a very quick mini demo just to get folks more familiar with what the site looks like. So let's test my technical skills here. Okay, great. So when you come into Craft, this is going to be our homepage, and you can navigate to a couple different places that I'm going to breeze through for you. So the first thing that we talked about was really understanding what types of funding is available for performing green infrastructure, other types of nature-based solutions that communities might be interested in. So instead of looking through a 90-page NOFO, we're giving you kind of a 1 to 2 page Word document that will explain what these different programs can do. Now, our group was focused first and foremost on bipartisan infrastructure law and Inflation Reduction Funding Act programs. So this is a work in progress. But wanting to daylight those opportunities. So when you open up each of our funding program overviews, you're going to get the same types of information in the exact same format. You're going to get background on that program. You're going to understand eligibility upfront about who can apply and for what. And then we're also highlighting if there's available technical assistance from us or other federal entities, as well as federal and non-federal sources of funding that could be braided with that initiative, because we know one project is rarely ever funded with one source of funding. So you can breeze through these, quickly pick out the information that you're looking for. You can see a lot of it is very bulleted to make the information easy to digest. Another area that I will just super quickly mention here is climate risk assessment resources. Nature-based solutions are fantastic for building climate resilience for a community. But when you are developing living shorelines and wetlands, you also want to think about climate risk currently and long-term, because that wetland can turn into a very different inundated structure over time. And maybe you are not going to be reaping the benefits over the lifetime of that project as you've anticipated. So we put together some great federal resources here for people to take a look at based on what they're interested in for tool kind of purpose and hazards, climate projections, and then also calling folks' attention to this risk assessment worksheet that really anybody can use to do a very high level risk assessment to their project or project location. Another big area that we wanted to hit on here was, again, making sure that there's accessibility, transparency, this common kind of communications and language around these important topics when we're speaking either in an engagement event or we're going out and actually using certain words within a funding opportunity, that is trickling down to the people that are actually applying and running those projects. So we put together a variety of outreach materials that you can check out here. There's great infographics you can throw up on social media, on screen at a conference, or in front of a client during a meeting. And this sample social media packet has some great messaging for nature-based solutions. You can see we cover benefits, what they are, even green infrastructure or nature-based solutions for agricultural, rural-focused communities. And then last but not least, thanks to Robin and others, we were able to also pull together a variety of topic areas that really, when you think about a climate resilient investment, we want folks to be able to think broadly about the different policy priorities that they have and get the biggest bang for their buck. And nature-based solutions, of course, was a part of that. And so instead of reading all of these documents that we have kind of out there in the federal landscape, giving folks kind of a 1 to 2 paragraph summary of what EPA is doing and what the federal family is doing, and then pointing you to some pretty key resources to help you, again, think about your project, maybe think about developing your application in a way that's not overwhelming. So those are the main components of Craft. And again, I think, one of the ways in which EPA, from our geographic programs, national estuary programs, other place-based or partnership programs that we have, to our core kind of Clean Water Act, brownfields, and even some of our air initiatives, is funding. And so we wanted to make it a point today to raise up this resource for those that are interested in this new tool as a way to really incentivize and support nature-based solutions as climate solutions and so much more for communities. So with that, I will stop there and turn it back to you, Daniela.
Hey, thank you, Stephanie, for your great presentation. And I see that Joe has a question for you, so you can unmute yourself, Joe.
Yes, I wanted to know, Stephanie, if EPA either has or could do an analysis to let us all know what are the top 10 plants and trees that maximize CO2 capture per acre per time period, per 5, 10, 15-year periods, so that we could make a selection or make a choice as to, for example, if you wanted to remediate a brownfield and then simultaneously use those plants to also capture CO2, it would be great to know which plants maximize CO2 capture over the most over 5, 10, and 15-year periods.
Yeah, I definitely appreciate that comment. I don't have an immediate answer for some of the products that we've developed to date, but I do know that our Office of Research and Development, having worked with them very closely in the past, and some of the research initiatives that they are pushing right now are absolutely going in that way, looking at not just benefits from nature-based solutions and quantifying those benefits, but also specifically for the greenhouse gas emissions reductions or CO2 reductions from those specific interventions and those, I guess, more of the types of plants and trees that can help you get there. Absolutely. It could be more in the case of, and I could see this with our research initiatives, if you're just looking at maybe more transportation infrastructure or stormwater infrastructure, really trying to categorize those solutions in that way, because it probably will matter, right? How you're designing and then plan to use that specific intervention. So we also have Robin, who's popped up here. I do want to give her a little bit of time to talk about the breakout as well. And Robin, if you have any insights into specifically that question, that would be great too.
Yeah, thanks, Stephanie. I was checking out the outreach resources. They look really good. So I'll look into yeah, I want to answer Joe's question directly. There is a resource that it's not EPA, but the iTree calculator. It's called iTree Species, and there's an iTree planting tool that the Davies and I think U.S. Department of Agriculture supports. And so there are certain species that you can put into the tool and it'll give you carbon storage. I don't have all the details for whether they have 5, 10, 15 years, because of course, as the tree gets more mature, it's sequestering more carbon dioxide as it gets older and more mature, so you see cumulative benefits. But I would definitely check that out, and I can put it in the chat as an initial resource. And we'll look and see what other potential things are out there, because it is geographically diverse. You want to plant native trees and native species depending on the location that you're at. So it wouldn't be like a national piece of information, but it would definitely be something that you would want to create on a regional basis, so that you're adding native trees to your area and getting the best CO2 benefits possible. And in our breakout session, I will be in our breakout session, and we are going to talk about federal funding and technical assistance that can help with nature-based solutions and other green infrastructure type projects. And it'll be from EPA, as well as we'll talk about water TA that Stephanie alluded to, the overflow sewer grant funding, and some other resources that you can look across EPA and our Green Infrastructure Federal Collaborative for potential options.
Mm-hmm. And I will just add, Robin, so we do have some tools and papers that we've developed, but that get a little bit more focused on the benefit costs for specific interventions that you're selecting for a given location. So with GIS mapping based, that are pretty great, like our classic tool, I think, Robin, yeah. And also have co-authored a couple of papers with ORD on what the performance of specific ag, urban, and also forestry BMPs look like, given specific climate projections and how the effectiveness of those interventions might change over time. So we have a little bit more on the performance based and also the cost and benefits based than we do the CO2 reduction potential.
Thank you. And just one quick question from Sabrina for you, Stephanie. How soon can I apply for and be awarded these resources?
So that is dependent on the specific funding opportunity. So some of these, because they were kind of one-shot deals through Inflation Reduction Act, what we wanted to do was kind of capture them as kind of an archived opportunity, understanding that those resources have recently been awarded and have hit the streets. And so if there's opportunities for folks to pivot with their projects and think a little bit more broadly about how to adapt them over time, that those, you know, flexibilities or priorities existed within the original program. So that's there. For the programs that are open, we are going to keep this list running and up to date, whether or not these are open or they're closed or they're just archived, like I said, permanently. We also have a great resource through EPA's website, which I love. It's epa.gov/invest. And so a lot of our upcoming bill and IRA based opportunities will pop up there. It's pretty good and easy to navigate. So that's really the best place to go to see what's available for you, if not ours.
And if I could also answer that question, we are starting on our Green Infrastructure Federal Collaborative webpage. We have a 20-minute webinar video, that webinar style video that has different funding opportunities that are currently open. And we're going to be rotating that throughout the year so people can come back and see what funding and technical assistance is available today to apply for. And that we'll continue to update that over time in a video format. I'll put the link in the chat.
Okay, thank you guys for all your helpful answers. If you guys have any more questions, you guys can ask them in the breakout activities later on. But for now, we will continue with Whitney from the Department of Interior and her presentation.
Perfect. Okay, a lot of exciting work going on. So thanks again to EcoAdapt and the Office of Science Technology Policy for coordinating today's session. I'm Whitney Boone. I work in the Department of the Interior's Office of Policy Analysis. I'm really glad to be with you all today and looking forward to sharing some information about our use of nature-based solutions, particularly as adaptation to extreme weather. So first, just want to do a quick orientation to the Department of the Interior for those who may be less familiar. You can see our mission and the bureaus that make up the department on the slide here. And as you can probably tell, we have a lot of really diverse responsibilities. So we steward 20% of the nation's land, including national parks, national wildlife refuges, and other public lands. We manage resources that supply about 17% of the nation's energy. We supply and manage water in the 17 Western states. We provide science about natural resources, hazards, and environmental health. And we uphold federal trust responsibilities to 574 federally recognized tribes. So this diverse set of responsibilities means that there really are a lot of varied opportunities for us to incorporate nature-based solutions into our work. And given our major role in federal land management, a lot of our day-to-day work actually involves conservation and restoration related nature-based solutions. So we really see NBS as opportunities to demonstrate how our land stewardship activities can provide services like adaptation to extreme weather, to human communities. So at the bottom of the slide, I have a link to our nature-based solutions policy, which we released at the end of last year. I encourage everyone to take a look at that policy to see how we're integrating nature-based solutions across our mission. But today I'm going to focus on giving an overview of how we're implementing nature-based solutions on public lands to help communities adapt to extreme weather. And then I'm also going to share some information about a new technical resource that we've been working on in coordination with Duke University. Okay, so as I mentioned in my opening, given our large land and water management responsibilities, NBS are really integral to Interior's mission, and we're doing them really all the time through the activities that we do in our day-to-day operations. So managing habitat, conserving land and water, restoring ecosystems, prescribing fire and fuels treatment, etc. And so a key co-benefit of a lot of these activities that we're doing is improved adaptation to extreme weather events. And these adaptation benefits are seen not only on the lands we manage, but also in the communities that our lands are adjacent to. So this table shows just a couple of examples of the types of nature-based solutions that we implement that can help with adaptation to extreme weather. Things like heat waves, drought, intense storm that could cause flooding. And it's worth noting here that a lot of these strategies can facilitate adaptation to multiple types of extreme weather events. So I'll share an example of that next. And one thing that you might notice from the example strategy here is that Interior has a lot of experience and expertise with those conservation and restoration related nature-based solutions. So we do things like conserve or restore forests to mitigate extreme heat impacts. We facilitate connectivity in rivers to mitigate drought. We create living shorelines to reduce coastal flooding that might result from severe storm events. And we restore riparian buffers to help absorb increased runoff and decrease flood impacts during rain events. So as an illustration of our nature-based solutions work, I thought I'd share an overview of an ongoing peatland restoration project that's happening in northeastern North Carolina. So here, the Fish and Wildlife Service is collaborating with a handful of different stakeholders to restore the hydrology of about 37,000 acres of peatland in and around the Poquoson National Wildlife Refuge. So that's the shaded blue area in the blue circle. And in this area, the Fish and Wildlife Service is working with their partners to re-wet drained peatlands. And then they're also helping to manage the drainage of the area and implement soil retention best practices. So this nature-based solution has many benefits that help the area become more adapted to extreme weather. It provides heat mitigation, so peatland vegetation can have a cooling effect on the surrounding environment. It can provide drought mitigation, so during droughts, peatlands help to regulate water loss in the area. It can help to reduce flooding, so during heavy rainfalls, the local tributaries might be overwhelmed with excess water, but peatlands can help attenuate those floodwaters by retaining water. And it reduces flood risk. So wet peat is going to be less flammable than dry peat. And even in a large area of dry peat, a small patch of wet peat can help to stop the spread of smoldering flames. And then restoring peatland isn't just benefiting the federal lands in the area. So nearby communities can also benefit from these actions. So a nearby community might be avoiding health or property impacts from flooding or extreme heat or wildfire. Their homes could be more protected from erosion. And then they also just may have more opportunities to enjoy enhanced recreational activities. So that's just a small example of how the Department of the Interior uses nature-based solutions. There's a lot more to share. And luckily, we've spent the past year and a half working with Duke University to develop the DOI Nature-Based Solutions Roadmap. And this is a publicly available resource that can help practitioners or really anyone who's interested in NBS to learn about opportunities to incorporate NBS into their work. So we have both a detailed PDF document as well as a digital version of the roadmap. So the PDF is incredibly detail rich. It's about 500 pages long, not exaggerating. And it contains some introductory material that summarizes cross-cutting considerations for nature-based solutions. So things like funding mechanisms, partnering opportunities, and regulatory processes. And then it details 29 different nature-based solutions strategies. And for each strategy, it goes through definitions, technical approaches, site suitability factors, likely benefits and outcomes, potential barriers that practitioners might face, example projects, and tools and references. So you can see a PDF of the cover here, as well as a link to the PDF roadmap. And then the digital nature-based solutions roadmap has pretty similar content to the PDF, but it's a little bit more interactive and user-friendly. So the digital roadmap has a searchable database of nature-based solutions strategies that you can filter by project goals or habitat type. It also includes considerations for how nature-based solutions could replace or complement gray infrastructure. And it includes more than 400 case studies of different types of nature-based solutions. So as a teaser, I have a couple of screenshots from our interactive roadmap. And these show what I think is one of the most useful features for practitioners or aspiring practitioners using the roadmap. So there are a number of different ways to filter for nature-based solutions, strategies, and case studies. So you can see in this screenshot, I'm using the dropdown to filter for strategies that help with a specific goal. So I'm looking for strategies that provide protection from storms. You can see what's coming up there. And then you can also see in the dropdown, there's options to filter for strategies that mitigate drought or mitigate extreme heat or protect property and infrastructure from flooding. So just one of the many useful things. I will focus on the NBS digital roadmap during the breakout. That's just a preview. And I'm happy to take any questions now.
Thank you, Whitney, so much for your presentation. Okay, I see a question for Whitney. Do you have any focus on environmental justice concerns or general equity?
A little bit. So in the nature-based solutions roadmap, in that front matter I described, the kind of cross-cutting principles, there are some considerations for environmental justice and really links to additional information and resources to consider in considering nature-based solutions.
Thank you. And one other question from Melanie. Whitney, can you expand on your riparian buffer work?
Yes, so the department does a lot of different riparian buffer work. So in the DOI NBS roadmap, there are a number of case studies, some on DOI lands and some on state or other lands that you can go to see kind of examples of different approaches and technical approaches for riparian buffer work. So if you want to join the breakout session, we can specifically go to kind of case studies for riparian buffers.
Well, I guess this can be a good segue into our breakout activity. So I just want to go over quickly the instructions for it. And so as we mentioned before, each agency will have their own breakout room that you can self-select into. This is where you can ask questions directly to the different representatives of the federal agencies about some of their work related to nature-based solutions, how are they integrating it into their programs and their work that they're doing there. And you can also ask questions about technical or financial and maybe a mixture of both. And so if we can get the breakout rooms teed up, and also feel free to move in between different breakout rooms as the time goes on. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for participating in this session. Hope you guys got a lot out of it, being in your different breakout groups. I'd like to say thank you guys for joining us, and a special thank you to the speakers. Round of applause for them and all the work that they're doing with nature-based solutions. And just thank you guys so much for the time that you guys have spent to come out here and speak to us. And I'd also like to say thank you to Doug Mason, who helped organize this event and really initiated this whole idea. So thank you for coordinating with all of the speakers. Doug, I don't know if he's still on the call, from the White House Office of Science, Technology, and Policy. And before we would leave, we would just like to plug our upcoming session on January 14th in 2025. This will be focused on the evidence for nature-based solutions for climate hazard risk reduction. That will be happening at 12 p.m. Pacific time. And is Doug still on this call? I was going to say if he wants to give any final remarks.
just to say thanks to the
Okay.
EcoAdapt team this for bringing us all together. It's really helpful to have this virtual community of practice. I learned a lot, and I really appreciate you guys collectively helping us all to continue to accelerate learning. And thanks again to all the agencies that led with great content and all of the participants that engaged in really helpful conversation. I know my breakout group was great. I assume yours was as well. So thank you all.
Okay. Thank you very much. And that does conclude our session. So thank you to all the participants for taking time to hear what the work is being done.